Hello everyone, and welcome. My name is Anna. I am on Momentum's National Coordinating Group, and I will be chairing today's event, which is part of a series of events that Momentum has organized over the past couple of months to explore ideas around socialist feminism and what it means to us. These events are happening obviously in the context of a revival of feminism as a grassroots street movement in the UK. Following the murder of Sarah Everard by a police officer and following police violence at vigils for Sarah, there have been women taking to the streets across the country in numbers we haven't seen in these recent years. This movement has also sparked a number of debates about the kind of feminism we want to see. Whether it's a kind of feminism that champions women in position of power, without discussing how they use their power, people like Cressida Dick and Priti Patel, or are we representing a feminism that stands for the majority of working class and marginalized women? Do we want a feminism that relies on more police officers and tougher sentencing to keep us safe? Or do we want one that sees justice in a broader and intersectional sense? These are some of the many questions that the left has been discussing. And these are some of the topics that we have explored in our events in the lead up to last weekend's Labour Women's Conference, which saw all candidates backed by Momentum, socialist candidates, elected to Labour's Women's Committee. We had events about socialist feminism in general. We had events about gendered violence, about the rights of sex workers. But I think it's important to look beyond just the UK, to look at the international context as well, and to learn from feminist struggles across the globe. Which is why today I am very excited to introduce a number of brilliant activists from India, from Chile, from Poland, from Rojava, and from the US, who will talk about feminist movements around the world and what lessons we can learn from them. In terms of how the event will run, you will be hearing from 5 speakers who will each introduce the campaigns they're involved in. After each of their contributions, I will take one question from the audience, from the chat. And then we'll have around half an hour for a general open discussion, during which I'll also be picking out questions for all the speakers to respond to. So without further ado, I am very excited to introduce Dipsita, who is a student leader from India, the Joint Secretary of the Student Federation of India, and he was a recent candidate in the Legislative Assembly election in West Bengal. Over to you, Dipsita.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you so much. I think I'm very excited and extremely glad that I'm being part of such a wonderful discussion. As you were rightly pointing out, that we are talking about feminism. We are talking about feminism in 21st century. And we are talking about what kind of feminism that we as activists, we as left sympathizer, or we as Marxists really looking for. As you correctly mentioned, that is it about one woman or few women getting position of power, or it's about a collective change, where people who are marginalized, may it be for their gender, may it be for their race, may it be for their class, all these people get more and more power. They get more and more in the bargaining. So the kind of feminism, or the kind of feminism movement that we are vouching for, or we are fighting for, is definitely a movement where the power comes from the few to the more people, where more and more people are given the opportunity, the access of resources, and a change, a socialistic change that all of us, I believe, together are dreaming of. We can surely reach there. If you're going to talk about India in particular, I am not going to take a long time, because if you have to talk about the feminist movement that are happening in India, it has to be a long discussion. But I just want to, cherry pick few things that has happened in the last couple of years, and why I think that they are going to play a very crucial role in how the feminist movement, or the socialist feminist movement, a movement which has a certain sort of class orientation, which are those points which are going to be very important for in particular in India's context. From 2014, India is run, or India is rather say ruled by a government which predominantly believes in patriarchy. They believes in Manusmriti. They believe that women are born so that they can cook and take care of the children. Their major responsibility is to be a domestic help. Our organization who believes that people who are coming from marginalized background, for India it is caste. So if you're born in a certain family, your rights as a woman or your right as an individual has to be a little lesser than the rest of the people who are apparently born in an upper caste, born in a more pious caste or a more pious family. So this is the context that we are fighting our battles. We have seen that few days back, just last year, one gruesome rape happened in Hathras, and there a 19-year-old girl was brutally gang raped, and then she was brutalized so badly, her there are different injuries. There are internal hemorrhages, and her spine were broken into different parts. Her tongues were cut. So she was admitted in the hospital and she died. And her death actually sparked many questions. The question was not only about gender rights. The question was not only about that a woman who went to her field to help her mother in the agricultural work. It's not about their right, but also the question of privilege, the question of caste, the question how in a Hinduized society or a Hindutva country like that of India, how women from the marginalized section, from the poorer section, from a lower class and lower caste is victimized, and how the people who carry forward these offenses are guarded, are safeguarded, and saved by the state machinery itself. So it really raised the question that you are talking about intersectionality, that gender is not in isolation. Gender is very much linked with class. Gender is very much linked with race. Gender is very much linked with religion. And we cannot see the question of gender as an isolated question without answering all of these embedded questions into it. The second thing that we have witnessed in India, which is also, as I was telling you, is a very important node in the feminist movement. You know that our government last year has come up with an amendment, amendment in the citizenship, where they're saying that people who are Muslims, they somehow needs to prove their nationality. They needs to somehow prove that they're citizen of this country by providing the documents of their forefathers, of their lands, which is completely impossible for a third world country like India. And it showed a real outrage across the country, across the globe. People who are not Muslims also, people across the religion came down the street and said that this is our India. All of us are equal citizens. You cannot say that because of our religion or on the basis of religion, people are going to be different right as citizens. And that movement, which became famous as Shaheen Bagh movement, where Muslim women took the lead. They were leading massive dharnas, massive sit-in protests for months, and it was a pan-India movement across the country. Muslim women wearing their burqas, wearing their hijab, wearing every religious symbol that they usually carry. They came down to streets and said that this is our country. We are going to reclaim it. And I think this is one of a very important point. Why? Because I think there's a lot of stereotype around Muslim women, about their rights, about whether they're capable enough or not. There's a lot of infantilization goes on around Muslim women. I think it was a breaking point there where Muslim women with their religious identity, with their class identity, with their caste identity, came down to the street and said, "This is our republic. This is our country. We are going to reclaim it. Your stereotyping, your hatred is not going to stop." And the third thing, which I believe it's a continuation of what has happened in Shaheen Bagh, and a very constructive step towards a socialistic or a socialism, where you're looking at socialism and feminism at the similar time. That is the Kisan movement, the farmers' protest that is happening, where people, the farmers, the peasants, the agriculture workers, all of them came together and they're protesting against the corporatization of the agriculture. They're protesting against the new agricultural law, the farm laws that the government has come up, and it is for the lockdown. There are a little bit of slowing down. Again, people are coming back to the street, and it's a huge protest happening across the northern India and few parts of the other parts of the country as well. And I think it also took a global shape where the Indian diaspora I mean, those who still believe in a democracy, those part of the Indian diaspora also came across the world, and they were also standing in solidarity with the farmers of the India. Now, what is peculiar, and why did I say that it's a very constructive, it's a very interesting move, is because the people who are protesting, of course, there are peasants, there are men, but there are a huge number of women. And these women are coming and saying that we do not want to be considered as someone's dadi, as someone's grandmother, as someone's mother, and someone's sister. We want us to be considered as a peasant. We want us to be considered as a farmer. When we are coming here, we are talking about our rights. And for the first time, I think the class issue, the issue of land ownership, the issue of agricultural right has become so central to any of the movement that has happened earlier. Earlier, we have seen the All India Kisan Sabha has done huge marches where women took to the streets with red flags. They were also echoing the same thing what these women are telling. But this time, the intensity is much more. This time, the size is huge, and a huge amount of women and men coming together and reclaiming their right of being a peasant, of whatever they think that the state must do to them. And it is beautiful if you go to the places where all these dharnas are happening. You will see that there is a change in the gender role. So men, you will see cooking, men, you will see cleaning, and you will see women sitting there, leading the dharnas. So there is one formation called panchayat. So this panchayats are used to be, uh, around the caste, and usually it is the men who had the opportunity to speak or to give an opinion for the first time, because the kisans were organizing themselves even through this panchayat. Women also became a speaker. Women also started putting their voice, and I think this is a very interesting and a very important change in the political discourse, in the activist discourse of how we see feminism growing in India. Because before that, if you Google search that what are the feminist movement, you will see these are a majorly urban oriented movement, where you will see organizations like Pinjrat, or you will see other women organizations coming and talking about women rights, about against sexual harassment, against gendered crime. But for the first time, that barrier has been broken. Now this rural woman, with their tractors, with their agricultural equipments, coming to the capital city, coming to Delhi and saying that, look, we are women and we are peasant. Yes, there is sexual harassment. Yes, there are gendered violence. Yes, there is lack of opportunity. But along with that, we are peasant. Consider, recognize us like that, and do give us our right. So I think the kind of feminism what both of us, I believe, we are looking for is a feminism which talks about the collective, is a feminism which talks about the majority, a feminism which talks about the 99% and does not only aim to be the part of the 1% powerful. So in that way, I think India, of course, there is a immense level of oppression that is happening. The government has applied different kind of draconian law like UAPA, and they're putting the activists inside the jail, and they're trying to break their morals. But what has happened actually, that all those tactics, all this repression, all those oppression, all those state brutality has actually given more and more food, more and more energy to the masses, and they're organizing more with each other. They're breaking the barriers and creating newer frontiers, newer solidarities. And I think that's exactly where our sense of feminism, our sense of going forward, our sense of class orientation, our sense of changing the society comes. I'm really happy. I'm sorry. I think if I have taken a little bit more time, I'd love to listen to my other comrades who will be sharing their own experiences. And if there's something that you want me to answer, or you want me to particularly talk on, I would love in the second round. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you. So that was really inspiring, and I particularly like how you talked about the solidarity between different movements, right? And women standing where we're not just someone's mom, we're also a farmer. I think that was incredible. Now I want to introduce Sandra Wencewicz, who is a feminist activist from Poland, and she is a representative of Młodzi Razem, or the youth section of the left-wing party that's played a leading role in the recent Polish struggle for abortion rights. So over to you, Sandra.
I am actually very honored to be here, and yes, I am part of Młodzi Razem mainly, although I am also a part of Razem, but the international chapter. And I would like to speak about the struggle in Poland and how basically the feminist movement has been the leading grassroots movement in Poland in the first place. So basically, we have to start with 2016, when the first threat of a ban on abortion was made by the then new government of Law and Justice. And that was a breakthrough moment for the feminist movements. And that was a breakthrough moment for the Polish society as well, because Polish society is not a civic one. It is not one in which people actually gather around an idea, but the threat of the total ban on abortion did exactly that. It rallied people from all over the country in hundreds of thousands against this idea. It actually was one of the first protests in many places since the change of the system, since 1989. So that was a very important step for those people. And it was also the first encounter of politics in a lot of cases for people. The women's strike as an organization emerged then, and alongside it emerged other feminist organizations like Girls for Girls, or Dziewuch Dziewuchom, as we call it in Polish. And it actually gave people a fixed opinion on the matter, which is unheard of, even though it was a reoccurring theme in the Polish society since 1993, when the so-called abortion compromise was made. And there were still many protests from the left, and there were still many protests from the feminists, because the so-called compromise was still a very big restraint on the right to abortion for women, because it only allowed us to get an abortion in the case of fetal defects, and in the case of rape, and in the case of a threat to women's life. And what came later is that we realized that those aren't actually realized by the country, that the country doesn't actually give us the space to use those bases as the right to abortion, and many people didn't get this right in the end. And after 2016 came 2018, and after 2018 came the protests of 2020 and the coronavirus, in the light of the coronavirus pandemic. And what is important to note is that there was a very big restraint on the law of assembly, and the protests still happened. The first protests came in the spring of 2020, when women still decided to do something, and we drove cars in the capital city and tried to protest this way. There were still a lot of arrests, but then it kind of grew silent for a while. And in October, something that the left had been warning us as the society about happened. The Constitutional Court ruled the main basis for abortion illegal, and that basis was the basis of the fetal defects, which consisted of 98% of all abortions made in the country. And what happened was, the exact same day the protests in the capital city broke out, the protests that became known worldwide. And we realized that we cannot rely on police in any way, because police violence broke out. People got arrested, people got beaten up by the police, people got violently treated. There were unlawful arrests, there were arrests of people just standing by. And despite that, the support of the public was there, which is the shocking part, that the Polish society actually supports the right to abortion, but the government does not reflect that in any way. According to the most recent surveys of 2020, around 60% of all people in the country support pro-choice movements. And yet we are in a situation that we are in. And I think it is important to note that the feminist movement has been the leading grassroots movement in Poland. It is the movement that inspires people, and it is the movement that that people rally about. It is the movement that people rally around in Poland. And in Razem, in the party of Razem, we are trying to push forward a bill that could save this situation. We don't know yet if this will work out, but there is a bill, and we are trying to do something. However unlikely it is that the conservatives in the parliament that make up the majority of it will try to help us with it. And I think that would be about it. If you have any questions about Poland, I would love to answer them.
Thank you very much. I think to save time, we're going to keep the questions for the end. But if people do have questions, please post them in the comments, and we'll make sure to come back to them. Thank you, Sandra. I think it was very interesting what you said about how the protests forced you to take a side, because previously it was seen as something that's kind of controversial, that politicians didn't like talking about and the public didn't like talking about. But now it's made a divide very clear. So I think that was really interesting, inspiring to hear. Next on, we have Rohash, who is a representative of Kongra Star, a women's organization in Rojava. She will say about the role of women in the Kurdish struggle. Over to you, Rohash.
Thank you, Anna. Good evening to all. Thank you for inviting me to this event. I'm going to talk about women revolution in Rojava. Maybe many of you know, following the situation, women in Rojava. Rojava is multi-ethnic and multicultural society, but the last Bas regimes imposed all its chauvinist policies against the Kurds. And the Kurdish women faced two series of challenges. One of them from society for being a woman, and from the regime for being Kurdish. Even the religion's culture too, because it is more Islam culture there. When the Arab Spring started, they affect Syria and Rojava too. In Rojava, the revolution started on July 2012 through the emergency of new thinking in northern Kurdistan in Turkey over the last 40 years. Kurdish women have developed a new gender philosophy based on a woman direct participation, organization, plurality, and autonomy in all walks of life. The multi-ethnic of Rojava refused to become a part of the struggle for power that started. They chose the third approach. It is democratic nation. And now I would to introducing Kongra Star, the woman organization, shortly. It is organized in Rojava, North and East Syria, and generally throughout Syria. It represents Confederation of Women Organization in Rojava based on a democratic ecological women's liberation paradigm. Kongra Stars aim for equal participation and representation within the construction of democratic confederal society based on a communal social life. It is organizing itself on the basis of communes, councils, academies, cooperatives, and committees. We have 10 committees like education, culture, politics, press and media, and we have a number of projects. One of them is Ecologic Women's Village. Our aim of to build equal society. Because of that, we aim to organize everyone in society, and they should to take a part in all in committee or commune or assembly. It takes the Kongra Star, it takes the co-chair system in the general organizing at all committees and every steps in the life. I just try to explain shortly Kongra Star. The women in Rojava, on one hand, they are trying to build free society based on women's liberation paradigm. On other side, they are fighting against ISIS. As you know, the Kurdish women started fighting ISIS in Kobani city to their resort. So we still continue struggling to build a national democracy systems. But in January 2018, Turkey and its allies, such as a Syrian militias, began an assault on Afrin canton. And in October 2019, on Grecipi and Serekani parts. Part of this and this area, it was parts of autonomy administration of North and East Syria. This illegal act of aggression was first and foremost intended to change the demographics of the region. In addition to an act of ethnic cleansing, the invasion and occupation of Afrin has also a target attack on women. The women of Afrin had created and implemented some of the most advanced laws and policies in the world in order to fight all forms of violence and discrimination against women, and had ensured that women were represented and empowered at all levels of political and military decision-making. Over the course of the brutal invasion and occupation, which continue to this day, more than two-thirds of Afrin original population has been displaced. Turkish-backed Syrian National Army groups have committed war crimes and crime against humanity targeting women, including rape and forced marriage. More than 200 women and girls whose identity are known have reported been abducted by armed groups since 2018. What is going in Afrin now? Exactly what happened in Shangal. Many of you know about Shangal. The difference is the name of group was in Shangal and in Afrin. We started campaign to stop all types of violence against women in Afrin and Serekani and Grecipi. With this campaign, we went to expose and draw attention of feministical policies of Turkey and allied. With this campaign, we want feminicide to be internationally recognized and crime against humanity. Shortly, I will say this, and in discussion we can, if there is a question, we can discuss. Thank you again for listening to me.
Thank you. That was really brilliant. It's great to hear about the key role that women's liberation and gender equality plays in Rojava. Now I would like to introduce one more speaker. We're lucky to have here Anunwa, who is the co-chair of the New York City chapter, of the New York chapter, of the Democratic Socialists of America. And he will say a little bit about social feminism in the post-Trump era. So over to you, Chi.
Thanks, Anna. Hi, everyone. So I want to thank Momentum for inviting me to this very exciting event. And I want to thank all the other speakers as well. So I'm going to talk a bit about the contemporary feminist movement in the United States after Trump and how this has intersected with the recent resurgence of the socialist movement in the United States as well. So with respect to the feminist movement, I think throughout the history of feminism in the United States, there's always been tension between those who might be termed liberal feminists and Marxist or socialist feminists. And I think the tension here stems from a disagreement about the extent to which women's oppression is tied to economic oppression. I think that for socialist feminists, in order to achieve women's equality and liberation from gender oppression, we believe that we need to tackle not only the cultural causes of women's oppression, but also the economic ones. And I think that for socialist feminists, socialist feminists throughout US history have been frustrated with liberal feminism for not sufficiently centering the material needs of working class women and queer people. And I think many socialist feminists are frustrated with a tendency within liberal feminism to focus more, or sometimes focus solely, on the cultural sources of women's oppression. And I think that furthermore, by ignoring the economic sources of women's oppression, there's also been a tendency in liberal feminism in this country to ignore the needs of working class women and to focus more on the needs of women at the top of the socioeconomic totem pole. And so to bring us to the present day, I think these class divisions within the feminist movement have become even more pronounced with the resurgence of the socialist movement in the US in recent years. For many younger feminists, they're not satisfied, or they're pretty alienated with a feminist movement that is not focused more on economic liberation and liberation from capitalism. And I think a lot of these tensions came to the fore most recently with the Bernie Sanders versus Hillary Clinton presidential primary election back in 2016, where many socialist feminists or anti-capitalist feminists supported Bernie and saw in his campaign and his platform a vision for a more just country, kind of much to the consternation of more liberal feminists who tended to support Clinton and were very excited about the symbolic victory of having the first woman president in the United States. And I think this tension between socialist and liberal visions of feminism has also been reflected in a lot of the grassroots political activity that many women have engaged in the post-Trump era. So after Trump was elected, there was a massive surge in grassroots political activity in the United States. Lots of people were, very horrified by Trump's election and were moved to join and form various grassroots political groups to move the United States in a more leftist direction. And a lot of this political activity has been driven by women and women of color specifically. And so on the more liberal side of this trend, you had events like the Women's March, which was a massive demonstration in multiple US cities after Trump's election. And it's a march that's kind of continued every year since then. And then on the more socialist side, though, you have a lot of women getting involved in various types of anti-capitalist organizing. And one manifestation of this has been the growth of my organization, the Democratic Socialists of America, or the DSA, which in the last 5 years has grown significantly to become possibly, I believe, the largest socialist organization in US history. And women have played a big role in the organization's leadership in recent years and in the development of our socialist feminist political program. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what that program consists of. So in the DSA, we kind of take a three-pronged approach to organizing that prioritizes issue-based campaigns, electoral work, and labor organizing to advance causes that we think will improve the well-being of the working class. And so for our issue-based campaigns, we're focused on campaigns to win Medicare for all, which would create a universal healthcare system in the United States. We're also fighting for a Green New Deal to fight climate change. And we're also engaged in a lot of different housing and tenant rights campaigns throughout the country to expand protections and rights for renters. And in New York specifically, in my chapter, we've also been focused on a campaign to significantly increase taxes on rich New Yorkers. And so I think for many people, these issues may not seem like traditionally feminist issues on the surface, but I think when one considers the importance of economic freedom to women's liberation and gender liberation, it becomes clear that access to dignified housing, healthcare, and a livable climate should be important feminist concerns. So, for example, with Medicare for All, this is a campaign that actually emerged out of socialist feminist organizing in the DSA. And the reason why this issue was so important for socialist feminists in our organization is that the healthcare system in the United States, the healthcare system that we have in the United States, your access to healthcare is very closely tied to your employment and to your relationship status and family structure. So most people in this country that have health insurance, it's because their employer or their spouse's employer or their parent's employer provides them with a health insurance plan. And so many women find themselves stuck in toxic relationships or toxic workplaces because they don't want to lose their access to healthcare. But with a Medicare for All system, however, healthcare would no longer be tied to employment or marriage, which will significantly increase women's autonomy. Housing is another issue that's similar where, evictions in the US tend to disproportionately affect working class women, especially working class Black women, many of whom are single mothers and the heads of their households. And, similarly, many women find themselves trapped in toxic living situations, toxic relationships because they can't afford housing on their own. So by creating a better housing system, creating more social housing and expanding tenants' rights, we can also achieve greater economic liberation for women. And so in addition to those issue-based campaigns that I've mentioned, we're also engaged in a number of campaigns to elect socialists to federal, state, and local government. For example, my chapter of the DSA last year, we elected the largest delegation of socialist legislators to the New York State government in over a century. And our goal with our electoral work is that by electing candidates from the socialist movement, we can effectively combine external, outside agitational pressure on the elite and legislators to pass the reforms we want. We can combine that sort of outside pressure with inside pressure from former socialist organizers who have now been elected to office. And we've seen, at least within the New York City chapter of my organization, that this combination of inside and outside pressure was really key to us winning big reforms of housing laws back in 2019. And these reforms were like the biggest expansion in renters' rights for New Yorkers in almost a century. And then finally, the last really important piece, I think, of sort of the recent rise of socialist feminist organizing in the US has been, labor organizing work, which I would argue is essential for socialist feminism as well, because by every measure, at least in the United States, women who work in unionized workplaces experience less abuse on the job and greater pay parity with their male counterparts compared to women in non-unionized workplaces. And so it's really important, I think, for women's liberation, for gender liberation, that we work to build up the labor movement. And in this capacity, members of the Democratic Socialists have been, so we have members who are union members who are organizing other union members to make their unions more democratic and accountable to their members from the ground up. We also have members who are training those who aren't currently unionized on how to create unions in their workplaces. We also have a lot of DSA members engaged in various types of strike solidarity efforts with striking workers in different industries. And what's really great about this work is that it's happening while the US labor movement is experiencing more growth than it has for a long time. And a lot of this growth has actually been led by women. So, for example, in 2019, there was a wave of teacher strikes throughout the country that were largely led by women. There was also the flight attendant strike back in 2019 that was led by women, and that resulted in President Trump ending his shutdown of the US government. And then we also had something called the Fight for 15 movement, which was a labor movement to increase the minimum wage, which I'd argue is crucial for women and women of color specifically who tend to get the worst brunt of the gender pay gap. And so to sum this all up, I think there's a lot of exciting work happening in the socialist movement in the US to advance a more equitable vision of feminism that centers not just the cultural bases for patriarchy and gender oppression, but also the economic causes of this type of oppression as well.
Thank you, Chi. That was brilliant. And those of us in the UK, as I'm sure in other countries actually, will recognize a lot of what you said about feminism, not just being about culture and symbolism, but being about the material conditions and the economic situation of women. Some things are different. We have universal healthcare in the UK for one, although not for all migrants. But many things are very similar. And I'm very glad that you talked about women's organizing in trade unions, which I'm sure we'll talk about more in the discussion. So thank you very much for that. We're still waiting for Alondra Carrillo from Chile, who I know, I've been informed, has been a bit confused about time zones, but hopefully she will join us before we end. But now I think we'll move to the even more exciting bit, although the speeches have been brilliant, the bit where we all talk about what we can learn from each other and discuss what we just heard. So can we bring everyone together? And if people have questions to the panel, please post them in the chat. Although we have a few questions we want to ask first to kick off with. Something very interesting that Chi just picked up on was women's organizing in trade unions. And actually, that was something I really wanted to ask you all about. What is the relationship between feminist movement in your countries and the organized left? Right, as trade unions or other street movements, grassroots movements, but also the organized left in political parties. I don't know who wants to kick off. Maybe you, Sandra?
Sure, I can go. So the feminist movement has always been supported by only one fraction in the parliament, because the rest of the parliament has always been conservative. And that one fraction is obviously the left, which is not growing stronger when it comes to the parliamentary force, unfortunately. And what is also linked to the feminist struggle is, of course, all of the trade unions, the left-wing trade unions at least. So mostly the Workers' Initiative, Inicjatywa Pracownicza, support the feminist movement in Poland, support the struggle for abortion, have issued statements and have taken part in all of the protests. A lot of those activists I know have gotten in a tough situation with the police because of the protests in 2020. And it seems that every left-wing organization in Poland supports the female reproductionary rights in Poland. And to me, that is no surprise, because the feminist movement has to be joined with the socialist movement. As she has mentioned before, those two things are linked. They cannot be unlinked, so to say. Our struggle is joined with the working class struggle. It is one struggle altogether. And what is also, I think, important in the case of the Polish feminist movement is intersectionality. In the case of intersectionality with the LGBT community, and the intersectionality, especially when it comes to trans inclusivity in Poland, with the feminists that exclude trans people being very not predominant, but being very loud in this sphere, and trying to kind of hijack this movement as one that does not include trans people at all. And that's why the feminists in Poland, the left-wing ones, have been calling the struggle as a struggle for abortion for uterus bearers, and not only women, but also trans men, for example, and non-binary people. And it is very important, and this is also the reason why the women's strike, so the organization that started it all in 2016, is moving away as the main part of this movement. Mainly because the left is growing more intersectional and more inclusive, and the women's strike members, the most predominant members of the organization, have had some controversial statements and have had some scandals going around them, and have issued very saddening statements when it comes to the arrest of Margot, who is a queer anarchist activist from the capital, and also a non-binary trans person going by she/her pronouns. And they have not supported her, and they have clearly some connotations that are against trans people, and there have been just a lot of controversies going around that, and the trans exclusionary feminists being very loud. So I think it's very important that all of the feminist organizations and that this movement, this grassroots movement, remains intersectional, and that it remains inclusive to all people and not only cis women.
Thanks, Sandra. Yeah, I think what we're saying is very familiar once again to us in the UK. Obviously, debates around trans rights and intersectionality, but also what you said about not wanting to support an anarchist who had been arrested. I think that's you can see it clearly sometimes. There's this distinction between people who want to support the grassroots street movements and the people who think that's not respectable and want to stay away from that. Dipsita, you talked in your speech a lot about women kind of claiming their role as members of the working class and in trade unions. Has there been any pushback? Are there any kind of men who want to protect their position in trade unions, or has it been generally well received?
I think so far, because these movements where I think they became more visible, they became more prominent and more accepted, because there are more women coming out in the streets. So I do not think that visibly there were any efforts from the men to hijack it or to kind of push them away. But I must say that even it is true that a lot of women are coming up as a trade unionist. They're really taking the streets on different political issues. But we still do not see that kind of representation of women in the leadership, in the decision making. For instance, the kind of the organization that I am associated with, Communist Party of India Marxist, the trade unions that they have, it's CITU. In CITU, we have women leaders. Okay, so the president is woman. She organizes the Anganwadi workers. They are basically frontline workers who go to the villages, to the rural homes, and provide food, take care of the primary education, etc. So we were able to get leaders from all those, grassroots movement, and somehow they are in a position of decision making. But that is not a very common sight. There are still many trade unions who are working together, who are also bringing a lot of women. But when it's about giving power to in decision making, I still see there is a lot of things that we have to do. Even in the communist parties, who are supposed to be the most progressive one, even the left wing, student organization. Yes, there are women, but if you ask me how many women had become the secretary or the president of SFI, the organization that I belong to, I would say none so far. So of course we are moving towards a better future. Of course, we are working together, but I would still say we have a lot to do. And this thing cannot be achieved only in the streets, only in the movement, but also inside our committees, inside our meetings. Until and unless we cannot change the organization from within, the people who are leading the movement, if they do not become more conscious, if they are not we do not make them feel conscious about their privileges, let it be their gender, let it be their class, I don't think we can really have a working change in the society. So I think yes, what I think she made very interesting comments. I was really following her. how she is mentioning about how health right is a woman issue, how equal wage is a woman issue, how the women of color, or the people who are already in the marginalized section, how they get affected with all these things which a lot of liberal feminists do not want to consider. So I think this is a very important, a very interesting thing, which is also very relevant in India. And I think that, thankfully, fortunately, we are having that transition. Finally, feminism in India right now is not only about, how I want to wear, how I want my clothes. It's not only about whether I can have a short hair or long hair. It became beyond it. It became about the land rights. It has become about the health facilities, about the frontline workers, about them being considered, about them being recognized, and of course, there's a change in the gender role. I believe and I hope that whatever we have started together collectively, we'll go forward, we'll march forward, and all the comrades that we are seeing right now, I think in future we'll all be standing with each other for further bigger struggles. Thank you.
Thank you, Dipsita. Rohash, I was wondering if you recognize any of this, if any of this sounds familiar to you. Obviously, Rojava situation is very different, but do you have any kind of similar conflict and similar clashes?
Maybe our experience is completely different. The way we're following and to defend women ourselves in front of the system we lived in, we built co-chair system, man and woman together. We can say in any party now, we're talking about parties, but there is one person leading these parties. Should be will that systems, how we can build this system, co-chair. And when we built this system, it was very difficult, of course. We not just fight and struggle in front, outside, inside too. We fight a mentality man for a long time, and we still struggling and fighting to protect the woman.
Seems like we're having some Wi-Fi issues. We can't hear you very well.
We never leave man to vote for women. Woman just voting for a woman, just not for man. We in our systems, we never talked about this is left or this one right or this one's where should be. We try to educate and giving knowledge to every woman, and still there is many women refused us, but we knocked every door to organize every woman in society, and then we try to find a place to every woman. We say if the woman, one woman now out of our organization, it is not organization, should be everyone in these systems to build a right and equal system in our society. We're working like this. This in beginner it was difficult, and now we built many different systems like Malajan, House of Women, to solve problem women. We have Malajan and we have Kumin system of Kumin. In Kumin, we're starting from Kumin to assembly. Our system we built from down to up, not from up to down. And now in UK or US, of course, it is difficult because we live systems. Men grow up in these systems, and the women's affect from these systems. We need time, but first we need to educate each other, and we need to be coming one voice. I think is not union, but there is no
Rohash,
or we can say
we're struggling to hear
system
you because your Wi-Fi is really not great. I'm not sure if you can.
System is easy to build. I think is.
I'm not sure if you can move maybe to a different room so we can get better connection. I hope we got most of that. I think you made some very good points about change being both kind of bottom up and top down, more kind of like systemic, but also coming from political education from below. But yeah, if you can make sure internet is good so we can have a more kind of fluent discussion, that'll be great. Yeah, maybe turning on video will help actually. Now we've seen your face. We had some interesting questions coming in the chat. We had a question from Melissa about, yeah, we're all different. There are many differences between our situations, like we talked about today. But what do you think is the thing that we all have in common? And yeah, how can we, I guess, feel the fact that, you know, we have many things in common across the world as women, as socialists, as feminists? Chi, maybe I'll start from you.
Yeah, this is a good question. So I think one thing that might join us, or at least one trend that we've been seeing, is sort of a backlash, like a global backlash to what might be called like the neoliberal ruling order. You know, I think neoliberal capitalism has kind of been the predominant economic order for at least the last 2 or 3 decades, especially with the end of the Cold War. And, you know, this has not been that great for working people. It's not been that great for really anyone who's not part of the 1% around the world. And I think, you know, throughout the world, we've seen backlash against that order manifest itself in different ways, some more positive than others. You know, I think in many countries, including the United States, but also all the other countries represented here, we have seen, you know, the resurgence of left-wing anti-capitalist movements. There have also been, you know, reactionary responses where, you know, we've seen kind of the rise of a lot of right-wing populists who are kind of, I think, feeding on a lot of working class resentment at the ruling social order. And, you know, I think part of our job as socialist feminists worldwide is to present a much more positive, much more humanistic alternative to both kind of reactionary right-wing populism and, you know, the sort of neoliberal consensus. I mean, I think that's kind of the only way forward if we want to save this planet.
Thank you. I'm going to hand over, I think, to Dipsita now, because you made a point about, you know, how the kind of backlash against women's rights and against progressive values, but also from the other side, the backlash against neoliberalism is international, right? And people often list and compare the US, the UK, countries like Brazil, but India is sometimes a bit forgotten in that. But I'm sure there's many similarities that we can point to, Dipsita. Do you want to tell us more about this?
I think she has made a very important point, and I think that is the centrality of our argument today, that all of us, no matter which country we belong to, no matter you know, what political organization we are in, but at the end of the day we are fighting a neoliberal state in everywhere. Maybe the forms are different, maybe their functionings are different, but their goal or their motto is exactly same. And I think what connects all of us is a dream, where the society is equal, is a dream where I do not have to feel conscious about being woman, where my safety, my security in the public places won't be questioned. I don't need to be scared of being a woman. I think we're thinking of a society where a girl who wants to study do not have to be a college dropout, a school dropout, because their parents cannot afford the fees that the you know, the schools, university they're offering. I hope all of us are dreaming of a society where people, irrespective of their caste, their gender, their race, or wherever they are coming from, they live equally with equal rights, with equal opportunity. I think that's what connects us. And if you look at all the countries, let it be India, let it be America, or let it be UK, for the last couple of years, the reason why people came down to streets, these reasons were all, you know, connected to it. If you look at the Black Lives Matter, when we are looking at Black Lives Matter, it's not only about racism. It's also about getting equal opportunity. It's also about how the people of color are, waged less. When you're looking at India, when you're looking at this, massive protest against the Citizenship Amendment Act, it's not only about the act. It's also again about the equal right as a citizen, of my right of being in this country, work in this country, and pay sufficiently. So I think that maybe the formations are different, maybe the protests are different, maybe the in surface the issues that we see are different, but what at the end of the day all of us are fighting against is same. And I believe we all have a shared dream of equality, of justice, of socialism.
Beautifully
Thank
said.
you.
Sandra and Rohash, do either of you want to come in and add something to that?
I think all of us come from a country where we have had some experience of a rise of nationalism and the rise of what can be called fascism as well. And I think that also connects us. And this, as both of you have said before, the backlash against women is very real and it's global. And this is a global trend. It is not a local one. And we, as a global society of women and as socialists, we have to fight against it. But it is also very sad that we have to fight in the first place to be considered equal. And I guess that is what joins us and what unites us, that we are equal people and we have to fight for it globally, because the odds are always against us, unfortunately. And neoliberalism is assuring those odds that they will be against us as long as it prevails.
Thank you. Rohash, anything on that topic? Of what's, despite all the differences that we discussed, what's the thing that unites us?
Sorry, I couldn't listening very well because I don't know what's the problem. I changed the internet line too. I don't know. My voice is coming now.
Yeah, there still seems to be some Wi-Fi issues. And maybe you could try turning off your video.
Yeah. I tried, but it's still.
Yeah, maybe that's slightly better.
Now.
Yeah, it still seems to be stopping, but while we're...
I didn't think well, yeah.
Yeah, I think you hear now. Okay, while we're fixing that...
Okay. I don't know when I...
Sorry, Rohash, maybe you can try joining from a different device or moving to a different room,
know,
because...
I tried.
Because we can't hear you very well currently.
As I changed that. Yeah, I know. And I couldn't hear it. Okay, I will try to switch on and off and on.
Yeah, because at the beginning it was perfect, and then kind of stopped. While we're fixing that, I see a few more interesting questions in the chat. There is a question from Roseanne about how feminist struggles in your context engage with the fight for prison and police abolition. Obviously, the debates around the role of police and tough sentencing in prisons in protecting women is a very live one in the UK, with the Labour Party focusing on kind of clamping down on crime and tougher sentencing. On the other hand, people pointing out that a lot of it affects marginalized people of color, marginalized women, trans people, working class people, and so on, in different ways. And maybe we should have a broader view of what justice means. Has this been a topic in your countries? I think this is something Sandra has already touched on a little bit about police violence and protests. Do you want to expand and say how different parts of the feminist movements approach the topic, Sandra?
Yes, sure. The left-wing feminist movements openly state that we cannot ally with the police, which is very obvious after the events of 2020, when the treatment of the way police treated the protesters was very unlawful, with anti-terrorist units on place in civil clothes, beating up people in the crowd and taking them out of the random. And those events, we didn't really know them. They weren't that common beforehand. And it feels like this is the effect of the pandemic and the effect of the amount of power the government has had because of its pandemic restrictions, which have been, for example, the ban on freedom of assembly. And in that case, it kind of allowed them to use this police force to pacify the protests that didn't need to be pacified, that were peaceful in the first place. And unfortunately, one of the reasons why the women's strike is not taken seriously anymore by a lot of feminists is that they are trying to thank the police for protecting those events. They are trying to involve the police in those events in a way that, oh yes, we thank you so much for protecting us, for saving this country and such. And it feels kind of ridiculous in the eyes of the protesters themselves, who have been beaten up, who have had their arms broken. There are many testimonies of people who have been hurt by the police at those events. And now the main feminist organization that has been the rallying call for all of the pro-choice movements in the last 5 years is trying to ally with them. It feels like an unfunny joke to a lot of us. And it is also something that is very criticized by left-wing organizations, by labor unions, and by more radical left-wing parties. Not all of them can, not all of them are in the position to do so, unfortunately, because of our system. But the more radical ones are openly speaking out against this. And it feels very clear to us as a movement that the police will never be our ally.
Thank you. Dipsita, I'm going to move over to you. I was wondering if that topic has come up in India. Is it a live debate about the relationship with the police and the justice system?
It is. I won't say it is as prominent as the other movements that are happening, but what has happened that after that citizenship protest was happening, there was a communal riot broke down in Delhi. We say that it's not riot, it's a pre-planned program where in one hand they can kill the people, they can attack the people who are protesting, but at the same time they create divisions among people, how people are coming together unitedly. There can be a bifurcation on the line of religion. So once that riot happened, once that program happened, a lot of student activists were picked up. Like my batchmates, people from my university, my seniors, they were all put behind the bars. And it was told that they all are terrorists, that they have link with ISIS, they have link with Pakistan, and they are here for destroying India. And it's a completely malicious campaign was taken by the government and the people in power. And the sad part is that all these people who were inside the jail, it's been 1 year. Until now, the police could not prove anything. There's not a single piece of solid evidence against any of them to claim that whatever this government is claiming. And most of these people are out in bail. But the question is not that. In India, we have a history that where particularly people from a marginalized background, Muslims, minorities, they are booked and then there is no trial. So they stay inside the jail for 10 years, for 15 years. And after 15 years, it is told that, okay, there is no evidence against you. You are free now. You can go. What will happen to those 15 years of my life? What will happen to this 1 year of my classmates, of my colleagues, of my friends, of my comrades who have stayed inside the jail? What will happen? There's a very sad incident. One of our comrades, her name is Natasha Narwal. She was booked and she was inside the prison. And during the COVID time, her father passed away. And it's only after her father being dead, the government, the court given her a permission of 7 days, like to come out and see the dead body of her father. Now, and now when she's given bail saying that there is no concrete evidence against her. Now, who is going to, compensate about the emotional loss that we have? of losing our father, of not able to see our father when he's alive. And what will happen to that father who has not seen his daughter when he was alive? So all these things are coming up. Of course, there are many organizations who work against, I mean, who work for the freedom of the political prisoners. This is coming up not particularly as a part of the feminist movement, but of course as a part of the larger movement for the human rights, for the equal rights. So yeah.
Yeah, that was very interesting. Rohash, I hope your Wi-Fi is slightly better now. I was wondering if this is a topic that's discussed in the Kurdish women's movement, how you relate to the state, the police. Let's see if we can hear you.
Sorry about that problem. I don't know from where. Maybe it was a rich discussion, but I didn't hear well. Sorry about that. General, just I would to talk about our like a Kurdish woman experience, because as you know, maybe is new systems in the world. Yeah, there is a long time women organize themselves. There is many feminist groups, and but in Rojava we tried to build a systems, a woman revolution, a woman systems. In this system, women can represent themselves everywhere. How we build this system? In my speech, we try to build a democratic nation system. We build from down to up, and should be woman leading. And we say if the organization doesn't organize out of woman is not legitimate organization. We should to organize every woman in everywhere. If one woman left this out of organization, there is gap in our systems. We should to fill this system. We started from communes, from commune to assembly, and to build many committee. Every woman can represent them in that committee. The important thing in the beginning, in all parties in our system, we co-chair systems. Chair, women can defend themselves and to protect their will everywhere. Maybe many words they tell the Kurdish women just they are fighting. We are not fighting. We defend ourselves. We started in Kobani. Yeah. If we didn't defend ourselves, we defend with a knowledge. At the beginning, we educate ourselves. Why we should to protect ourselves? Why we should to defend ourselves? How to becoming to be a equality society? How to fight these systems? If we didn't defend ourselves, we will be in the selling in market like happened in Iraq, in Shanghai. Educate ourselves in academy systems. And in other academies, we didn't just educate a woman, we educate a man too. And we working because we still struggling. With that, we build new. We working in new knowledge. It's calling genealogy, woman knowledge, and in this woman knowledge, first we worked in like practice, but now we working in theories too. In our experience, like a Kurdish woman, we build our theories.
I think you stopped there again, unfortunately.
With
yeah, we can hear you a little bit better, but
we learn from our practice and make.
Yeah, you're freezing a little bit, but I think you got a lot of important points there about self-defense, about women being represented on every kind of level of the system. I wanted to kind of leave Chi at the end for this question, because obviously the slogans around defunding the police came from the US, the recent wave of Black Lives Matter movements. But on the other hand, people from the right often throw kind of women's rights in opposition to that. Like, what about rapists? What about violent men? Who's going to protect the women from the men? And I was wondering how much you personally and the DSA has kind of engaged with these discussions.
Yeah, so this is a great question, especially as it relates to U.S. context, because, as we've seen with the recent resurgence for the Black Lives Matter movement last year, there's been an increase.
About policy and rape,
I think you can carry on.
Okay, I'm sorry. But yeah, there's been an increased interest in things like in the ideas of police and prison abolition. And I think how that relates to like gendered violence is that, I think in the past, so I mean, I guess one thing that's complicated is that, I think the traditional sort of response to dealing with gender violence is sort of like expanding police response to that sort of violence. But what I've learned from police abolitionists and prison abolitionists recently is that actually the police do a pretty bad job in the United States in terms of, preventing rape and assault, and also actually like apprehending rapists and people who commit sexual assault and bringing them, to trial and whatnot. And the whole process of the criminal justice system does have a way of kind of re-traumatizing sexual assault survivors. And so the way that a lot of prison abolitionists have phrased the issue to me is that if the police are not doing their jobs already, if they're already not effective at addressing this problem, why don't we consider different solutions? And so I think there are a lot of feminists within the abolition movement who, are kind of sort of brainstorming more kind of community-based or non-carceral ways of dealing with things like domestic abuse, domestic violence, rape, sexual assault, which I think, is a concern for people. I think there is definitely a right-wing reactionary response to defund that is like, what about the rapists, and kind of cynically using women's rights in that way. But I also think there is like a non-reactionary element that like genuinely doesn't know how we would deal with that type of violence in the absence of outside of the criminal justice system. But I think there are people who are kind of working on developing those alternatives and kind of organizing people around those alternatives. But I think it's going to take a lot of work. I think that it's definitely even taken a lot of work for me to kind of, wrap my head around the idea that, more policing, more prisons may not be the answer to things like rape and sexual abuse and so on and so forth. And I think what is kind of interesting about the second wave of Black Lives Matter in the US is that it's the first time I've seen people talk about things like police and prison abolition in the mainstream in a serious way. Like, I first heard about the concept a decade ago, but it was kind of seen as this kind of fringe idea. So I think that portion of the left has definitely made rather significant strides, at least in the discourse.
Yeah, no, I think that's very true. These ideas are slowly kind of crawling into the mainstream, right? And as the left, we're still developing our kind of language and our responses and our vision for what justice looks like. I saw a few other, I know we got about 10 minutes left, but I saw a couple of others interesting questions in the chat. One from Shonale about how feminists in different countries can continue to look up and learn from each other. I also want to add to that whether you have any personal experience of working with feminists from other countries and linking up kind of movements across borders, because I think we all agree that it's a worthwhile thing to do. But if you have any kind of personal experience of trying to do that, and whether feminist movements in your countries have done that before. Dipsita, maybe you first.
Yeah, so, so in South Asia, so it's India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan. So these three countries have a very interesting history. I mean, all of us were together. Then the division of India on the religion, on the basis of religion, Pakistan was formed. Then on the basis of language, Bangladesh was formed from the Pakistan. So there's a lot of complex and a very tense relationship that has been always between these three countries. But if you look at sociologically, if you look at linguistically, if you look at culturally, then there are a lot of similarities in between these three countries. And the part of country I am from, West Bengal, the language that I speak and the language that the people in Bangladesh speak, it is exactly the same. Actually, my family is also a refugee from Bangladesh. So I also have a different kind of connection, but I'm not the only one. There are so many people like that. So what we did, we have been doing it. So the feminist movement, the student movement, they have been coordinating with each other. I mean, the communist movement, to be very particular. So the Communist Party in Pakistan, the Workers' Party and the Communist Party of Bangladesh, and of course the Communist Party of India, both the Marxist and the CPI. So there is a kind of coordination that we work with. Few days back we did like this online chat with our comrades, the women comrades of Bangladesh, and we all were talking about the same issue that we are talking about today. We're talking about gender, we're talking about women rights, we're talking about how we can make our places a more safe space, how we can be more gender neutral inside our organization, how we can make things more inclusive. So yes, I think for our case it was easier because to some extent our socio-political situations are same. In India, there is a right-wing deviation. In Bangladesh, also the main thing that they fight is fundamentalism, is a communal fundamentalism, is a religious superiority. So I think there are a lot of links that three of us can bring because of our origin, maybe. So there had been this trans-border communication and movement and solidarity where we stand by each other. So if some attack happened in India, I see my comrades in Bangladesh doing a protest in support of us. So in Bangladesh, if the student protest is happening, we are going to do that. In Pakistan, if the protest is happening, we are also going to come in solidarity. So that kind of solidarity is cross-border, at least in South Asia, had been formed. But I think there are more scopes of making it larger, making it bigger, making it broader. I remember when Black Lives Matter happened in America, we did, from Student Federation of India, the organization I'm part of, we have given a call, a nationwide protest, a solidarity program were taken for the people who are fighting in America against the racism, against the police brutality. So I think, yes, there are had been instances of solidarity and standing by each other and cross-border, coming together. But I really think there are more scopes. I hope this platform and our conversation today will lead up to more and more solidarities and coming together.
Yeah, I hope so too. Sandra, maybe over to you now. I was wondering, or first, if you could tell us how internationalist do you think the women's movement in Poland is? Do you have many links with women around the world doing similar things? But then secondly, people who are interested, how can they support women in Poland from abroad?
So I don't think the Polish women's movement is that international, unfortunately. The main protests that have been done abroad weren't done by local communities, they were done by Polish people living abroad, unfortunately. That's how most of them were organized. And I live in the Netherlands right now, and all of the protests done in the Netherlands were also done by the Polish community. And actually, most predominantly the party Razem and its international chapter. I feel like the Polish feminists do support international movements, and I really love that. I know we have also done a lot of solidarity demonstrations. We have done demonstrations in solidarity with Black Lives Matter, for example. when I was still in Warsaw was when I was there as well. And there have been others as well. But what I think is that in the international community, it kind of feels like the support is only on paper, at least politically, because nothing is being done to push the Polish government to a bit of to a more lenient way, and also while the abortion ban was still in the making, nothing was being done abroad. The international community barely reacted. I remember I was checking the internet almost every day if there are some international newspapers, for example, even talking about the real threat of an abortion ban in the making, and there was barely anything. And that was the moment in which the international community could have done a lot. And I wish it had. Unfortunately, I wish it had. What I think right now is important is that our converts internationally to remember that the protests are still going on and the struggle is still there, that we're trying to push a bill that could save this situation, however unlikely it is, and that we need this solidarity. We still need it. The police violence is still going on. The protests are still going on. They're way smaller than they were in October, but they are still there. And unfortunately, the police violence has expanded to other fields as well in Poland. It has also expanded to the climate movements and a lot of other grassroots movements in Poland. And basically, a lot of demonstrations nowadays are ending with a lot of arrests and checking of IDs. That is the new reality, and it is also reflected by the loosening of the lockdown. But within those new rules of the loosened lockdown, demonstrations that are made on spot, so spontaneous demonstrations, are still legal, which is quite telling, I would say. And I think that it feels like the international community feels like, yeah, this is done. This is over. There is nothing to do anymore. And that is not true. And we still need your solidarity. We still need you to speak up. And we still need you to talk about what is happening here.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's true you're saying about how most solidarity campaigns are led by Polish people abroad. So, for example, there's a movement of kind of Polish migrants in Germany and in other countries kind of helping Polish women travel abroad to get an abortion, right? But these women also need support from the communities they live in abroad, right? People who like help with money, with booking rooms, with organizing protests and so on. I don't know if Rohash is back and if she can say a few words about internationalism in the context of Rojava. Or, well, I guess it's one of the challenges of international organizing, isn't it? There's always internet issues. In this case, I'm going to hand over to Chi, who will maybe make a few closing remarks about...
We have a connection.
I'm really sorry. It seems to be cutting off.
Hello?
Yeah, we can't hear you. I'm really sorry. Chi, do you want to? Yeah, are you there? Okay. Well, Rohash is gone. Chi, do you want to say a few words about how kind of the women's movement in the US approaches internationalism and how we kind of show solidarity with movements around the world?
Yeah, I mean, I think speaking about the broader women's movement in the US, it's hard to say how well we've been good at internationalism. I think within the socialist movement, I think we've seen, like, we've definitely, at least within the Democratic Socialists of America, like, we've tried to link up with socialist organizations in other countries. Like we've sent delegations to meet socialists in other countries just to learn firsthand like what's going on, what sort of campaigns they're engaged in, like what tactics they're using, struggles they're facing. Because yeah, I mean, obviously, you know, in the US, we have a lot to learn from our socialist comrades around the world. And especially given like the history of red baiting and anti-communist sentiment in the United States has kind of done a lot to really hamstring socialist organizing in this country. I also think that, you know, one of the more inspiring examples of international solidarity I've seen in the US left has been sort of like the connections made between Black Lives Matter and the Palestinian solidarity movement. You know, I think there's been a lot of synergy. I've seen a lot of synergy between those two movements. And, you know, these are both kind of massive grassroots movements where I think people do see a strong sort of connection or strong sort of similarity between the struggles of Black Americans in the United States facing police brutality, among other forms of inequality and discrimination, and the struggles of Palestinians who are obviously, you know, dealing with an apartheid regime. And, you know, I think the more that grassroots movements around the world can make those connections, can kind of notice the linkages in different struggles, the more like that's better for the global left as a whole. And then I guess one other thing with respect to the feminist movement. So there was something you said earlier, Sandra, that really stuck with me about how, you know, 60% of Polish people support the pro-choice movement, and yet like those in power are kind of refusing to enact abortion rights, pretty much opposing the democratic will of the people. And we're seeing that in the United States as well. Like the vast majority of Americans do support some form of abortion rights, and yet, you know, there is this small coterie of right-wing politicians that are just constantly trying to chip away at abortion access, abortion rights, despite the fact that this is not what people want. And, you know, I think one thing that I think a lot of American feminists could learn from their comrades abroad is just how do you build a grassroots movement to really, how do you build a mass grassroots movement around abortion rights? Because I think to some degree, we never really had that. Like, even though we have legal abortion in the United States, we got that through a court decision. It wasn't really through a mass movement. And I think, you know, if we were able to win that right through a mass movement, it probably would be more secure. It tends to be harder to overturn the will of the people once something becomes law. It's not, I'm not saying that's like a surefire thing, but like, you know, generally speaking, I think once you enact a popular program, it's very hard to remove it. So yeah, I mean, I would love to learn more about what folks in Poland are doing around this, and also from abortion rights movements in other parts of the world. And yeah, I mean, I think we could also stand to learn a lot about how feminists in other countries want things like expanded parental leave and just like a bigger social safety net more broadly.
Thank you. And that's our time finished, but thank you everyone for your contributions. That was really, really interesting and really informative. Despite the struggles of international organizing that we've kind of witnessed today, from Wi-Fi issues, power cuts in Dipsita's case, to time zones, poor Alondra is sending her heartfelt apologies. These things happen, but I think we've had some really interesting discussions today, and I hope this will just be the beginning of building stronger links and learning from each other. Just a few announcements for the end. For those of you who are Momentum members, we are currently in the process of refounding Momentum, rewriting how we organize, how our democracy works, how we support local groups, and so on. So if you're a Momentum member, please engage the refounding process, check your emails. If you're not a member, you can join and take part and help shape the future of Momentum. Secondly, for those like me who still qualify as young, so under 27, and I'm the Labour Party, there is an election for Young Labour Liberation representatives happening very soon. And Momentum is endorsing 4 socialist candidates who will be having a rally on Sunday. So once again, please check them out. And finally, next month, we are launching our racial justice program of events. There will be events about migrants' rights. I think that's the first one, and a number of others covering some of the issues we touched on today. So please follow us, stay in touch, and see you at the next event.